Hi, this tutorial is brought to you by pm-prep35.com. We are a free PMP training website. You can access pm-prep35.com for free mock exams, chapter tests, and tutorials. In this session, I am going to cover Perform Integrated Change Control process, which is part of Project Integration Management knowledge area, and it falls in Monitoring and Controlling process group. Perform integrated change control is one of the important process in terms of dealing with changes. What is a change? A change is anything that can affect the baseline. The baseline can be related to scope, time, and cost mainly. And when you say baseline, these are all approved by the customer or the senior management, and the project team is supposed to stick to these numbers. If there is any change to these baselines or change in scope, time, or cost that has been approved, then it has to follow a predefined change control process in order to be sure that the change is reviewed and then approved, so that there is a consensus that's reached between the project management, project team, as well as the senior management or the sponsor and the customer. So that's where the perform integrated change control has significance. Perform integrated change control. So each of those terminologies are self-contained or meaningful in conveying the concept behind the change control process. So the change as such has a life cycle. When you say change, the change in terms of project management process concept is again change to the baselines, something that has been approved and signed off by responsible body within the organization or the different stakeholders involved with the project. So now the changes are normally identified either by the project team, or they can be identified by they might be required by the customer, or it can be called for by the sponsor as such. So anybody, any stakeholder who's involved with the project can ask for a change or identify a change. So here is the cycle of change. The change normally gets documented once it is decided that it is a change, it's a valid change. It gets documented in the form of a change request by the team or the project manager, whoever is identifying the change, and the project manager calls it as a change. So then that becomes a change request. Now the change request goes to the change control board. The change control board is a responsible body for the project who can approve or reject changes. Sometimes it's not necessary for a change control board to be in place. Sometimes the project management plan might state a responsible team member or the project manager, they themselves can take decisions about changes. So the change control board is thought to be a group of senior managers. Sometimes it might involve the customer and sponsors also in the change control board. So when you call a change control board, it is a mix of people from the organization, the senior management level, the project managers from other business units, or the sponsor. But it's not always necessary to approve or reject changes using the change control board. Sometimes a responsible team member, in a bigger organization, a responsible team member who's given the authority to make decision about changes can take over the role to approve or reject changes. Or it can come to the project manager himself, who directly has a contact with the client or somebody who is responsible for the product specification, he can talk to them and then he can approve or reject changes. So ideally, the change control board is the authority who can make decisions on changes. So they can approve or reject changes. Now, once the change is approved, only the approved changes can be taken up by the uh, project team for implementation. So they take up those changes and they implement in the deliverables. So when you say deliverables, it can be an end product or a phase wise deliverable. So for the particular phase, that is the deliverable. For example, you might be in the design phase, the deliverable can be a high level design document, which might not be the actual end product that could go to the customer in the project life cycle, but still it's a deliverable for that particular phase. So now when you have these deliverables, when you have the changes getting implemented on the deliverables, then they are called as implemented changes. Now once they become implemented changes, they get validated again by the quality control team. They check what was the change that was approved and then what has been implemented. So this is the life cycle of the change as such. It gets documented as a change request, then somebody who's responsible to approve or reject the changes, which might be in the form of a responsible team member, project manager, or a change control board. They review the changes, they look at what is the change compared to what was baseline, what is the current baseline, and then they might approve or reject the change. The approved changes are implemented by the project team, and now the quality control team validates the change against the um, actual change request which was approved. So it's about validating changes, is about looking at the work product or the deliverable and comparing what was documented or approved by the change control board. So this is the life cycle of the change. Now integrated change control process mainly deals with looking at changes, approving, rejecting them, then maintaining the integrity of changes in terms of maintaining a change log where all the rejected all the changes that came to the change control board have an entry, but then they will also have a status called approved or rejected based on when the request came to them and when did they approve or reject and what is the reason for approving or rejecting those changes. So maintaining the change log, the integrity of change log, is also the role of the change control board. So apart from this, they make their decision based on the work performance report. So now if we look at the life cycle of how a work performance report gets generated, the project team has the work performance data, or in other words, they are performing the work of the particular phase, and at any point of time they have details about what is the status of the current work that they are doing, which becomes the work performance data. Now then the project manager quickly walks in and he asks what is the status of work. Now he gets different, from different teams or different team members, he collates the work performance data and he builds a work performance information which is more in line with what is the senior management is looking at, what is the customer is looking at. It might be something like a metrics information like the defect density, or how much percentage of work has been completed compared to what is the actual deliverable, what percentage of work is completed. Now these go into the work performance report. So the work performance report is a document which has placeholders for different metrics which is of interest to the different stakeholders like the customers or the senior management to tell the health of the project. So he fills these placeholders in the work performance report with different metrics. The metrics are nothing but your work performance information. So that's the life cycle of how a work performance data becomes work performance information, and then it becomes work performance report. The work performance report is more helpful in making decisions. So it goes to the change control board, say they review it. So looking at it, the health, they can find out the health of the project and they can approve or reject the change. The work performance information, in other words, is created by the project manager. He collates information from different team members, the raw data, he processes it, and it becomes work performance information. But the work performance data is really raw in terms of it is per team or the per um, uh, team members work. He looks at his work and he tells what has been done in that area. So that's how you need to map work performance data, work performance information, work performance report. So understandably, to the change control board, the work performance report is really important because it is one place they can quickly look at the health of the project or the deliverables of the phase. So now when you look at changes, there are two kinds of changes. One is process oriented change and the deliverable oriented change. So when you say deliverable oriented, it becomes, when I find an issue with the deliverable, it is called as a defect. But when it is process oriented, you can make corrective action or preventive action. So your changes can revolve around three types. It can be either a corrective action or a preventive access to a process. Then the defect is thought to be something which is not good for the reputation of the business, because it it is more related to the customer. Defect, if it gets to the hands of the customer, then it can spoil the reputation of the business. So defect is more related to the deliverable, but corrective action, preventive action are more related to the process. But all of these can be raised as change request. For example, um, I I am working on a project wherein it has two levels of review, but then in my previous project there were three levels of review, and the third level is totally different from the other two levels of review. Then I would want to implement this as a corrective action so that some defect or might come into the deliverable can be stopped due to that corrective action. So it's more like I'm following something which might have been missed out. But preventive action is more in lines with you are stopping something from happening beforehand. You are being proactive. So these have slightly overlapping meaning. Corrective action is more like I planned something, but then I am not following that process, but then it was opened up by somebody who saw it, oh, this was planned, but then this is not being followed. But preventive action is more like you are doing something and you think there could be a better way of doing it, so you're preventing it by having one more round of review. That is what preventive action. But corrective action, if you plan 3 rounds of review, but then you are doing just 2 rounds and you have somehow missed out one round, then that is corrective action. So your change request can have corrective action, preventive action, or it can be a defect. So corrective action and preventive action can need not be changes to the scope, but defect can be a change to the scope. You have probably left out a totally some set of requirements and it gets uncovered by the quality control team. So then that becomes a defect. So this is about changes. So changes can be corrective action, preventive action, or defect. So defect is a problem with the deliverable as such. Corrective and preventive action or problem with the process, or you need a change in the process that's being currently followed. So this is the whole, these are some of the terminologies. You have changes, the changes having a life cycle of being approved or rejected. Then you analyze the impacts, you maintain a change log. So these are some of the processes followed within the integrated change control process as such. The change control board is a responsible body which can approve or reject changes. It is a mix of sponsor, customer, senior management. Sometimes this role can be taken over by the project manager or a responsible team member. Work performance reports are used to make decision because they have the health of the project or the various indexes that can help in decision making. So with this background, we will next look at what is the format of the change request, which will give us an idea of how a change request, what the change request covers, or what is the process involved in change request approval or rejection. So this is a format that I picked up from the net. So a change request has a submitter information. The submitter can be a team member, because I can uncover while doing some work, I can uncover, oh, this has been missed out, or this is not as per requirement. So normally you write the type of CR. Here you have enhancement, defect, but you can also have process level changes that you might want to include as part of the change request. So defect and enhancement are more related to the deliverable or the end product, but you can also have certain things related to process, which is more internal than going to the customer. So so you have the project program initiative name, you have the submitter's name, brief description of the request where you say this is the kind of change that needs to be done, date submitted, date when it should be approved, priority, reason for change, other artifacts impacted. So in the one important part of the change request is to look at different impacts it can cause to the project objectives. So assumptions, comments, any other attachments you might want to attach your analysis about cost impact, schedule impact, and all that. Then the most of the change requests, I mean the process for the change request is to go to the for review to the project manager, because it's not always that the project manager uncovers a change. It can be a team member doing it. So the requester or the submitter might be totally different from the project manager for the change request. So a change request needs to be reviewed by the project manager before it goes for approval. So the project manager initial analysis is one section of the change request, understandably. So he calculates the hours impacted, duration impacted, so schedule impact, cost impact, all this he documents and he approves it. So these things he gets to do based on his preliminary understanding of the project with the team member and looking at the health, the various indexes, and but then this is more in line with writing what could be the impact, how many hours are required, what is the current state, and things like that. He's going to make a recommendation here after his analysis, wherein he looks at the indexes or the work performance report, and then he makes that decision. Then it goes to the change control board for the final decision. So that's also part of the change control, that's also the part of the change request format. So the decision is whether approved, rejected, and they put an approved date or the rejected date also there, and they specify why it was rejected. So here they take a look at the work performance report provided by the project manager. So it's more like the project manager has already made the decision, and then he leaves it to the change control board to make it final. If the project manager thinks that it's going to impact the schedule and is going to say it's tough, then mostly the change control board will go by him, because the project manager is the ultimate authority. So so that's part of the decision making process. But then the flow, how the change control, how the change request flow, process flow works is it gets documented by somebody who has found the change, who thinks there's need of a change. Then the project manager reviews that, he puts his comments. It might be anything related to how many days of effort is required, how it will affect the current position of the project, current schedule. Will it make worse or will it make better things better? Then it goes to change control board. The change control board reviews whatever is there and they approve or reject, and then they write their comments specifying why they made this decision of approval or rejection. So that's about the format of the change request. Now the log or the change register is more like a list of all changes where you have change request number. You have a change request number for every change request, so you put the change request number, date when the change was submitted, who's the project manager. I mean, project name is obviously an important entry, or it is a header there in the change log. Then you have approved or rejected status. Then you have the reason why it was approved or rejected by the change control board. So that's a separate document, which is a register having all list of all changes right from the day of the inception of the project to completion. So with this background, let's quickly walk through the processes, or I mean the inputs, tools and techniques for this particular process called perform integrated change control. Okay, so the perform integrated change control process um, is concerned with the reviewing requested changes and either approving or rejecting those changes based on project objectives, current status, forecasts and other project constraints. So the project objectives come from your project management plan, current status comes from your forecast, or the current status comes from the work performance report. Then you obviously have your change request, which has all these impacts analyzed. So from here you can obviously easily make out what could be the inputs. But let's get going with the next point. This process is not only concerned with the end product of the project, but also any intermediate deliverables committed as part of the project life cycle. So based on the phase you are in, the integrated change control process can be performed. So if I have a project with 5 phases and each phase has a different deliverable, so there can be changes rising in any phase of the project. And then so this point conveys that you obviously need not have a change that relates to the end product. You can have changes related to the intermediate deliverables also, or to the process as such that's being followed. So these are different categories of changes. This process is responsible for managing changes to organizational process assets. From the point of input, tools, techniques and ITT, I mean the outputs, this point wherein the integrated change control board, they need to track organizational process assets, is not does not hold that much of weightage, because when you look at the ITTOs, you do not find the OPA updates as an output. But then the change control board is responsible to even manage changes to process assets, something which has been added to the assets as a guideline that might itself be changed. That's what this point tries to convey. Okay, so change requests can be approved by the sponsor or the project manager or a responsible team member. Okay, in some projects or organizations, a change control board can be responsible for the process. So that's something we have discussed. Changes can be of different types. It can be a process oriented change, or it can be a deliverable oriented change. So that's what this point is all about. The change control board can take the form of a group of senior managers. Customers or sponsors may be part of the board. Yeah, so it's not always necessary the customer or the sponsor gets involved. The change control board sometimes might be going to the group of senior managers, or sometimes it might be the decision of the project manager if it is a process oriented change that you're trying to make in the project. So again, one more point that needs to be covered with respect to the change control process, the integrated change control process, is when you're doing your change control, you sometimes will have to look at the configuration control also. What is configuration? Configuration is about what process should I follow when I am changing a particular artifact. For example, when I'm creating a change request, I would add a label in my configuration management system as created or documented. Then once somebody reviews it, I would add a label called reviewed to that particular artifact, which is in the when it gets into the configuration management system, like version VSS, or a version control system. Other than that, you add labels to it. So for example, I am the first person who is submitting the change request and I am uploading it to the configuration management system. I would label it as there's a provision to label these documents in the configuration management system. So there I would label it as documented or created. Then my project manager reviews it, and then he might add his comments to the change request and he will upload it to the configuration management system. That time he would add a label called reviewed. Then it goes to the change control board. They would take a look at the change request. Now they would add a label called approved. So this is a process which is called configuration management process. So this also some needs to be tracked by the change control board, so that they see, okay, the proper statuses or the proper labels have been added to the configuration item part of the configuration management system. So this is a separate process as such, wherein you might have configuration management audit, or that again is overviewed by the change control board. So that sometimes these changes will be viewed by the customer, because he would have access to the configuration management system. At that point of time, it should be easy for him to make out which change request has been approved, which is under review and all that. So these labels play a vital role. So that's why the configuration audits or the configuration control board also sometimes becomes a role of the change control board. So let's get going with the inputs of this particular process. The inputs, first input is the project management plan, which says what are the objectives, current objectives, or what has been planned, because changes will affect these baselines that is currently present, or it might affect the plans. And the project management plan has all the baselines and the link to other subsidiary plans. So that is the one place you can look at different baselines, and you can easily make decisions. Next, the work performance report is a documented form of the different metrics, which is easy for circulation between among all the stakeholders. So this is one important input for the change control board to make decisions. Then you have the actual change request, which has the details about what is the change all about, and then it has more relevant information to the change in terms of seeing what is the timeline needed and all that. So this is one place where the change control board can make decisions very easily. So the work performance report is more in line with seeing what is the current status of the project, what is the health of the project, and then it gives them some overview. But the change request is more in relevance with the change as such. And the PM plan is more in line with what is the current baseline, what was planned, and how far we are going away from the plan and all that. The other inputs are enterprise environmental factors. Enterprise environmental factors are a constant input in case of integration management knowledge area, basically because the project integration management knowledge area as such is integrative to all the knowledge areas. So you need to keep an eye on the enterprise environmental factors or the external factors that can affect the project as such. So here you're talking about configuration management system, which again is a link between this particular project and external customer. So the management system can be something that has been decided and is an external system that is used by the customer, and you will have to incorporate that into your project workflow. So that's where the enterprise environmental factors play a vital role here. So when you're talking about project management information system, as an example, whenever you have a project management information system, that is part of enterprise environmental factors, because it has something like the work authorization system as part of it, which again might be mandated by the customer. So that way, here, although project management information system is not that relevant, but then The configuration management system, which might be part of the project management information system, might be a web interface or something which is used by or mandated by the customer. So that's where the enterprise environmental factor is a vital aspect in deciding the tools, as well as there might be some processes or that might have to be followed mandatorily, and that is an external factor that's affecting the project organizational processes. So you might have some processes that were followed previously, which were best practices and which might be useful in making the decision about the changes or the change control process. So moving on to the tools and techniques, you have expert judgment whether to take up this change or not. Meetings, yes, meetings with the change control board, meeting with the team member to understand and analyze the change control tools, or again an important tool to not only upload your changes but then see the status of changes probably and things like that. So change control tools, or mostly change control tools, or a mix of configuration management system and then a web interface probably, where you can go and see the status of changes and things like that. So change control tools help you specifically deal with the change control process. This might take the form of an internal system to store change requests, and there, when you normally use a configuration management system to store any document, and their status, probably the status can be pulled out into a web interface and you can display that. So this is so these two coupled together probably can be called as a change control tool. Outputs: approved change requests. I would rather say approved / rejected change requests, because the change control board not only approves, it also rejects some of the changes and documents those in the change log. So approved change request is one of the inputs. These approved change requests go for implementation by the project team. So when you say project team, depending on the phase, it might be a design team, it might be a development team and things like that. But then in this process they get approved and they go for implementation, and that implementation gets done in direct and manage project team process. Then the change log has the list of all the changes, whether they're approved or rejected, and all in one place. Okay, the next important output is project management plan updates and project document updates. Now when I approve my change, what I would do is I would sometimes go and, not sometimes, always, you would make changes to your project management plan and the project documents involved before you actually implement those changes onto your deliverable. So this is where project management plan updates and project documents updates make sense in case of this process. So you can think as, after something is approved, it's not that beforehand you make changes onto the documents. You go back, you put those new baselines, or you make changes to scope or quality standards in your PM plan or other schedule document and things like that. Now you make those changes and you have an approved signature or new baseline in place. So that's what this project management plan updates and project document updates mean. Again, the updates is more of a keyword in case of PMBOK, which mostly relates to changes that have been processed by the change control board. So in this case, in this particular process, it has more relevance in terms of something gets approved and that it goes into the project management plan or the other project documents, and then it gets implemented into the actual deliverable, or it becomes part of the process. So that's about perform integrated change control process. This process is one of the important processes in terms of changes, how to process change and things like that. Do visit pm-prep35.com and you can find a lot of free resources in terms of mock exams and chapter tests, and also look at our other tutorials. Thank you.